It is my duty to inform the House that the Speaker is unavoidably absent. Therefore, in accordance with the statutes, I would ask the Deputy Speaker to please take the chair.
O eternal and almighty God, from whom all power and wisdom come, we are assembled here before thee to frame such laws as may tend to the welfare and prosperity of our province. Grant, O merciful God, we pray thee, that we may desire only that which is in accordance with thy will, that we may seek it with wisdom and know it with certainty, and accomplish it perfectly, for the glory and honor of thy name, and for the welfare of all our people. Amen. We acknowledge we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anish-in-Nuak, Dakota Oye, Oyeti, Dene Sule, Nehithoa, Gwiak nations. We acknowledge Manitoba is located on the homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. Please be seated. Good morning, everybody. The honorable orders of the day: private members' business, the Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Which, Deputy Speaker, on House business, pursuant to Rule 34(8), I am announcing that the private members' resolution to be considered on the next Thursday of private members' business will be one put forward by the Honourable Member for the Pas-Kamisak. The title of the resolution is Calling upon the Provincial Government to provide psychiatric assessments close to home for all Manitoba children.
It has been announced by the Honourable Official Opposition House Leader that the resolution to be brought forward by the next time resolutions are brought forward next Thursday is one put forward by the Honourable Member for the Pas-Kamisak. The title of the resolution is Calling upon the Provincial Government to provide psychiatry assessments close to home for all Manitoba children. The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker, will you call for second reading Bill 244, the Protecting Youth in Sports Act?
Shall move to second reading of Bill 244, the Protecting Youth in Sports Act. The Honourable Member for St. Vital.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I move, seconded by the member for St. James, that Bill number 244, the Protecting Youth in Sports Act, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for St. Vital, seconded by the Honourable Member for St. James, that Bill 244, the Protecting Youth in Sports Act, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House. The Honourable Member for St. Vital.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am very happy to be raising and bringing forward this bill in the House today on behalf of so many community advocates who have raised their voices over the past several months about the importance of doing more in fact, doing everything we can to protect youth in sport. And so I'm very happy to be bringing forward and being at this stage where we can now debate this in this legislature. Community advocates raised their voices after hearing the disturbing stories of what happened at Churchill High School and what happened with their football team. And after hearing those stories, which of course is not limited to one high school, not limited to one sport, happens across the province, advocates took action. They contacted us, they raised their voices, and they pushed us to ask ourselves, can we do more to protect youth in sports? And that's why we're here. And I want to thank each and every one of those advocates who reached out to their MLA, reached out and made their stories public, and motivated so many legislators to take this issue more seriously. And that's why we're very happy to be bringing forward a bill that will take further steps to protect youth in sport. Particularly, we want to thank Coach Jordy Wilson of the Winnipeg Rifles, who was very vocal about the importance of doing more, doing everything we can to protect youth in sport. I also want to thank the people that we spoke to in a variety of organizations and a variety of perspectives around how we best protect youth in sport. Those include groups like folks from the Sport Manitoba, including folks from Football Manitoba, Winnipeg High School Football League. Of course, we spoke to parents who were affected by this type of sexual harassment, sexual abuse. And of course, we want to also make sure that this is centered around athletes. Young athletes who are the ones who are affected and are victims by this. We want to make sure that those voices are heard in this process. And we thank them for lifting up their voices. And we thank them for all the work they do to help push us to make sport more safe. I also want to thank my colleague, the MLA for St. James, for all the heavy lifting he's done for this bill. He's been an integral part of this progress. Quite frankly, the bill could be, he could be standing up here introducing this bill, but I'm glad to be part of a team and be the one today to move the ball forward on this as part of our NDP team. Now, I want to be clear that while I hope that this sort of thing never happens again, I fear that it might. And it's that fear that's motivating me to do more to protect youth in sport. And just like those advocates who talked to us, who called us, reached out, were in the media, and pushed us to do everything we can to, did everything they could to protect youth in sport, I also, and our NDP team also wants to do everything we can to protect youth in sport. And that's why we're here. We know that some of the initiatives that the government has raised over the last few months have taken steps, but they have not gone far enough. They have not been enough to ensure that we're doing everything we can as legislators to protect youth in sport. So that's why we're here. Now, this bill that we're introducing today, Bill 244, aims to fill the gaps and strengthen what has already been in place and keep our athletes as safe as possible. Some of the things that this bill aims to fix and to strengthen is a requirement for coaches to take a training program that specifically would prevent sexual abuse, harassment, bullying, and abuse in sport. It's also a requirement for coaches not to host young athletes in the coach's residence without prior permission. This bill also has inclusions for parents, because we know that many times we have requirements for coaches, but we also want to make parents aware of what grooming looks like so that they can help to protect their own children in sports. And so this bill would have training programs available for parents of young athletes that would, A, be able to identify and help them identify inappropriate behavior that the child or parent or child may be exposed to while engaged in athletic activity. And B, it also helps to make the parent aware of appropriate actions that they may take if their child may be or has been exposed to inappropriate behavior. This bill isn't also limited to coaches and parents, but it also extends to the young athletes themselves. And it makes training programs available for athletes at an age-appropriate level, training, to help them identify what is inappropriate behavior, and also let them know the appropriate steps to take if they experience or see others involved in inappropriate behavior. Now, it's very important that those things happen, that we tackle both from the coaches themselves, make things available for parents and student athletes so that everyone is aware of what inappropriate behavior looks like. They have mechanisms to prevent and stop it if it happens. And also, this bill also aims to increase reporting on this. Because as stories like this happen more and more, there is an erosion in confidence in our athletic systems. And by being transparent and being open about what kind of training is happening, it allows parents and athletes to feel more confident that they're going into an athletic activity that is as safe as possible. Now, this is a private member's bill, and it has a limited scope in terms of what can be brought into it. It cannot include initiatives that would require funding. But there are many things that would protect youth and sport further if there were funding available. And so, outside of the scope of this private member's bill, I would urge the government to take even more steps, strengthen even in more ways how we protect youth in sport. And those would include putting funding behind and supporting further the promotion and the use and awareness of that safe sport line that is available for young athletes, for parents, or for other community members to call in tips of when they see inappropriate or what they think might be inappropriate behavior. More funding for that safe sport line. More funding to investigate tips and issues that come as a result of calls to that safe sport line, so that there are avenues where those people who do report can know that their cases will be investigated and looked at by the appropriate bodies. And also to make sure that there is funding and support available for victims and their families. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing to keep kids safe in sports, that we ensure that we are helping to protect and helping to keep safe those who have already been traumatized, and make sure that they have the support they need to carry on. And that includes making sure that there are counseling services available for them and their family. And so I'll just conclude my remarks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by just saying to anyone who's watching, again, that if you are experiencing a situation that you might think is inappropriate, and you are not sure where to go, I encourage you to take the opportunity to call the Safe Sport Line. And the number for that Safe Sport Line is 1-833-656-7233. You can call that number and hopefully get the help that you need to ensure that your situation is as safe as possible, and any other student athlete that you know of is playing and participating in sport as safely as possible. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, very much.
A question period of up to 10 minutes will be held, and questions may be addressed in the following sequence. The first question may be asked by a member from another party. Any subsequent questions must follow a rotation between parties, each independent member may ask one question, and no question or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The floor is open for questions. The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I guess I am the only one who has a question this morning. My question is for the member from St. Vital. I want to thank him for bringing forward this bill this morning. In the spring, he brought forward a piece of legislation, a resolution, very similar to this bill, and in the resolution it talked about having a text line available. Would there be a text line with this bill?
The Honourable Member for St. Vital.
Thank you. I thank the member for the question. I think in the bill it's not appropriate to just prescribe the specificity with how public can reach out. We want to make sure that there is avenues for people to reach out, whether that's a phone, a Safe Sport phone line. I think certainly a text line would be available, or whether it's an online portal. I certainly urge and hope the minister takes the comments of the member to heart and makes a text line available, makes online portal available, or phone line, whatever is the most convenient and accessible for young athletes and their families to report any inappropriate behavior.
The honourable member for Fort White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the member realize that what he's calling on is already required of all coaches in Manitoba? Does the member have a problem with Respect in Sport or Respect in Sport program the way it's currently set up?
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Thank you. I appreciate the member's question, but the aim of this bill is not to repeat anything that's happening, but to strengthen it. It's to strengthen any gaps that are currently in our system. And presently, community members have said that there are gaps, and that's why we're bringing this bill forward. This bill not only includes requirements for training for coaches, but it also makes training available for student athletes and their parents, and that's one of the avenues where this bill strengthens current legislation.
The honourable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to ask my colleague, why might youth be hesitant to come forward and report that they've been sexually assaulted?
The honourable member for St. Vital.
I thank the member very much for the question, and I again want to reiterate my thanks and appreciation for all the work he did in this bill as well. Sadly, there's still a stigma around coming forward and putting your name behind the fact that you might have been a victim of sexual abuse or sexual harassment. And that's one of the reasons why there is a safe sport line, so people have a safe way to report inappropriate behavior. We want to also make sure that when we encourage the government to provide counseling services, that there are mechanisms for people to report any inappropriate behavior in a safe and inclusive manner.
The honourable member for Borderland.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for St. Vital for his work in bringing this bill forward. I'm wondering if the member could share what groups he consulted with before bringing this bill forward.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
I thank the member for the question. Yeah, in my comments, I mentioned some groups that we were able to consult over the past few months. Those included groups like Sport Manitoba, Football Manitoba, Canadian Centre for Child Protection. We also talked with a variety of coaches, including Coach Wilson, parents who've been, their families members have been victims of harassment and different levels of abuse. And I think we also recognize that at the center of this are student athletes themselves, right? Who are the ones who are the victims of abuse in sport. And so these are the people that we consulted when we were crafting this bill.
The honourable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to ask my colleague, what are the effects of youth being sexually abused by a coach or person of trust?
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Yeah, I thank our member from St. James for that question. It's a very serious impact when you have been the victim. It not only scars your thought process and feelings around that sport that you've been involved with, it also really erodes your trust from many authority figures and other people who you ought to be able to trust in our society. And so it has a real damaging effect. And that's one of the reasons why we're not able to include it, because it's a province member's bill in this legislation, but we are urging the government to provide additional counseling supports for victims of sexual abuse and their families.
The honourable member for Fort White.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. After reading through the legislation, I noticed that the bill only extends to coaches' residences. We on this side of the chamber are well aware that grooming takes place in a variety of different places. Why does this bill fail to exclude places that grooming can take place, such as hotels, amusement parks, restaurants, shopping malls, parking lots, vehicles, etc.?
The honourable member for St. Vital.
I thank the member for the question. Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of places where grooming or inappropriate behavior can be taken. This bill chooses to take one step in that direction. I urge the member to take the step with us today, support this bill, and if he wants to at a later date bring in even more, another piece of legislation to strengthen it and encourage other places, I encourage him to do that as well. But today we're taking one step in a positive direction, and I hope the member and his colleagues can support the step that we're aiming to take today.
The honourable member for Borderland.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This bill is a piece of provincial legislation and would not apply to any sports team that operates on a First Nation. Has the member consulted with any First Nations about what this gap would mean for them and their athletes?
The honourable member for St. Vital.
That's right. I thank the member for the question. There are a variety of places where athletic activities take place, whether it's on a First Nation, whether it's in a city, whether it's in a rural area. Our aim is to take a step today to make sure that all kids, all youth in sports stay safe. And we can look at other ways to make even more people in Manitoba safe. I think if the member is serious about making sure that all Manitobans and youth in sports stay safe, we would take the step today. And we would look again at how we can even strengthen further gaps in the future, which includes funding for counseling, includes funding for promoting the tip line, and making sure that we fund all areas where athletes are potentially in danger and keeping them as safe as possible.
Are there any other questions? The rules only allow for each independent member to have a single question, so I know people are pointing. The honourable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The training this bill requires helps everyone involved in sports to identify inappropriate behavior that we might otherwise miss. Why is this training so important?
The honourable member for St. Vital.
I thank the member for the question. And I think the training is important because many people don't know what inappropriate behavior looks like. It might sound strange, but sometimes you don't realize when you're being groomed, right? I think the member for White mentioned in the comments when we debated the resolution in the spring that he didn't know what grooming looked like. When I was a young athlete, I didn't know what grooming looked like and if I was being groomed or not. And I think the point of this is to educate young people, athletes, so that they have their eyes open and they can protect themselves, to educate parents to know if their child are being groomed, and to help coaches understand what is appropriate and what is inappropriate behavior.
The honourable member for St. Boniface.
Thank you. I want to thank the member for bringing this forward. I was just wondering if you could explain is there a current screening process in place for coaches, or what is the process? Are there things like child abuse registries and so on that have to be included? If you could just explain that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
I thank the member for St. Boniface for the question. Obviously, Sport Manitoba has restrictions around training and checks, as well as a variety of school divisions. If you coach through a school, that varies as well. If you coach through a high school or your school division, might have requirements on the training and the security background and child abuse checks that you might have. So I won't answer in specificity, but you can follow up with those organizations to get the details. But I'll say that this bill has clear requirements on training that coaches would be required to take to make sure that they are aware of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and bullying, and they're not, hopefully, to prevent those cases happening in all sporting activities.
Member's time has expired. The honourable member for Fort White.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as the member from St. Vital says, he realizes that this is just one step and many more steps can be taken forward to strengthen this bill. My question for the member is that if he realizes that this bill needs to be strengthened, why did he not reach out to the Minister of Sport, Minister of Education, or I myself, who have mentioned numerous times to him that I'd be willing to work in a nonpartisan way?
Order.
Forward.
The honourable member for St. Vital.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the member's question because we did have a meeting with the Minister of Education, and the Minister of Sport. We urged them to do more. And since that time, that meeting over a month ago, we haven't seen the action. That's why we're bringing the bill forward, quite frankly. Right? It's because the gaps still exist, because the government hasn't filled the gaps, that we're here today debating this bill. And I urge them to support this, to do everything they can to support youth in sport.
Right on, Jamie.
The time for questions has expired. The floor is open for debate. The Honourable Minister of Sport, Culture and Heritage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to rise in the House today and put a few words on the record with respect to this proposed legislation. I do thank the member opposite for introducing this. I think on this side of the House, and perhaps I would say in all sides of the House, we really do commend all the survivors who've come forward to share their experience in a very public way about maltreatment in sport. Not only does that help bring some of the perpetrators to justice, but it does also give courage and bravery to others who may have experienced something very similar to come out and share their stories as well. So I do commend the survivors for doing that, and Mr. Deputy Speaker, I assure you that our government really supports them in their journey to healing and to pursue justice. I know that it's been mentioned here in the House a few times about everyone's experience in amateur sport, and I had experience in amateur sport as well. And knowing full well that 20-some years ago, we probably wouldn't have had an idea what grooming was or what it looked like, and we wouldn't recognize it. I myself used to compete in Olympic weightlifting with Weightlifting Manitoba back in the early 2000s. I would have not recognized grooming myself. So we as a society have come a long way, and I know that Sport Manitoba as well has come a long way over the last few years in addressing some of the issues that we see as maltreatment in sport. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would just like to highlight some of the things that Sport Manitoba is currently doing, and in cooperation with some of its partners as well. So, first of all, there's anti-racism in sport. The Anti-Racism in Sport campaign is committed to address, disrupt, and eliminate racism and discrimination in sport. Commit to Kids. So the Canadian Centre for Child Protection resources for sports organizations, coaches, officials, sport leaders, volunteers, and parents are there to help kids safe in sport. The Canadian Centre for Child Protection also provides tools to parents and kids to understand and identify sexual abuse on their website. And they do have a website where you can visit and see what kind of services are offered there. The Rainbow Resource Centre. The Rainbow Resource Centre offers support to the 2S LGBTQ+ community in the form of counseling, education, programming for individuals ranging from children through to 55+. It also supports families, friends, and employers of this community. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Sport Manitoba also provides preventative measures in encouraging safety in sports. Some of them include respect in sport. Sport Manitoba believes that being proactive, ensuring sport in our province is welcoming to all participants. Respect in Sport helps promote these values through a simple and convenient online training course for coaches and sport leaders. Responsible Coaching Movement, or the RCM, consists of 3 pillars: the Rule of 2, background screening and ethics training for coaches. They also provide resources and processes to follow for sport to be safe, smart, and secure for all. The Rule of 2, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is one of the pillars of RCM. Sport Manitoba provides resources to take action with the Safe Sport line. It was mentioned earlier here today, but it's called the confidential helpline at 1-833-656-SAFE or 7233. If you're experiencing or witnessing any misconduct in sport, including bullying, harassment, hazing, or abuse, sport participants have the right to experience safe and welcoming sport environments. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do have a document here for the Rule of 2 that Sport Manitoba uses, and I would like to table that here for the benefit of the House, showing just what some of the infographics that are used to help educate not only parents, coaches, athletes, but folks and bystanders in the sport community to understand what a Rule of 2 is. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was actually pleased to join my colleague, the Minister of Education, in June, I believe, of this year, when we announced more funding for safety in sport. Sport Manitoba provides $160,000 each year to some of these initiatives, and this past spring, we increased that funding by $250,000 for a total of $410,000, working very closely with Sport Manitoba to make sure that as conditions change and as society certainly evolves and we become more aware of what maltreatment looks like and some of the issues and conditions that lead up to maltreatment look like, Madam Speaker, that Sport Manitoba is able to stay on top of that, and Sport Manitoba is able to serve and protect the very folks in the sporting community, particularly our young people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know, like I said, many of us in this House have experience in sports, anywhere from professional to amateur. Myself being from the amateur sport community, it was very, like I said earlier, it's at the time in the early 2000s, we were really not as aware as we are today of what maltreatment would look like and what would constitute maltreatment. And I'm just very glad to see that that has evolved and has changed, and that we've made tremendous strides in that arena, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, I do thank the member opposite for introducing this legislation, and I believe that we on the side of the House support the essence of the bill. We do believe that there is room for some improvement, and perhaps at a later committee stage that can be addressed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But again, I want to say thank you to the member opposite, and I know that on this side of the House, and particularly myself and the Minister of Education have worked very closely together on making sure that there's safety in sport, not only in amateur sport, but amateur sport within the education system as well, because Mr. Deputy Speaker, as you know, that often maltreatment doesn't know any boundaries, and that's why I want to make sure that this is a whole government approach in addressing this very issue. And beyond the sporting community, beyond the education community, we know that maltreatment happens in all aspects of people's lives, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and our government certainly condemns maltreatment in any sphere of someone's life, and also commends, though, the survivors in coming forward with their stories, Mr. Deputy Speaker. While it may happen in different venues to different folks of different backgrounds, athletic backgrounds, and different interests in life, at the end of the day, Mr. Deputy Speaker, nobody supports maltreatment of anyone for any reason. So just with that, I put a few words on the record here as to what's been done, and I think that there's always more work to do with respect to this evolving situation. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to say that working closely with my colleague, the Minister of Education and Sport Manitoba, a lot of work has been done, and we look forward to working together with all organizations to ensure that maltreatment becomes something of the past, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And with that, thank you so much to put a few words of on the record here with respect to maltreatment in sport.
The Honourable Member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand here in the House in support of the Protecting Youth in Sport Act, Bill 244, introduced by my colleague from St. Vital. I'd also like to start out just by thanking him for all his work in leadership in bringing this bill forward and his partnership in developing it together. It goes without saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that when our kids sign up to play in sports, whether that's in a community sports team or whether that's in a school sports at any level, they should be safe from sexual abuse of any kind. That goes without saying. But what we've seen over the last 8 months, and we've seen with some of the revelations that have been brought forward here in Manitoba, is that, and thanks to the bravery of victims and the families of victims who've come forward with their stories, and thanks to the work of advocates, is that we have a lot more work to do to help protect young athletes from harm here in Manitoba. Not just in one sport, but in all sports, whether athletes are playing with community clubs or through their schools. And that's why we're here today. We're bringing forward this bill and encouraging this government, and specifically the ministers responsible for sport culture and heritage, as well as the minister responsible for education and early childhood learning, to listen to the victims of sexual abuse in sport, to listen to the families of those who've been abused and sexually abused in sport, and to listen to the coaches and athletes and sports organizations that are coming forward with solutions. We've come forward with a clear message, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we need more action to make sports as safe as possible for everybody. Manitobans want to ensure that here in this province, we're doing everything we can to prevent sexual abuse and abuse of young athletes, that we're doing what's needed to support those who've been victimized as a result of their involvement in sport, that we're working to ensure those who are responsible for victimizing young athletes are caught and held accountable as early as possible. Our communities want action, and they want to see all of us in this House working together to do what's needed to protect our kids and make sports as safe as possible. Mr. Deputy Speaker, about 8 months ago, we heard from a St. James community business owner and head coach of the Winnipeg Rifles, Jordy Wilson, who reached out to express his concern about the revelations of sexual abuse and abuse that had taken place at Vincent Massey High School within their football program. And Jordy's words to me were, enough is enough. We got to do something. And what Jordy helped me to understand was that we have some pretty big gaps in our current system when it comes to protecting young athletes from sexual abuse. And he challenged us to do something about this and to work together with this government to make something happen. And this conversation led me to connect, along with my colleague, MLA for St. Vital, to dig deep into the issue, to engage in a lot of conversations with a wide range of people, many of whom my colleague for St. Vital has already mentioned here, to learn more about the risks to young athletes and what we can do about them. We've spoken to a number of coaches, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, the CEO of Sport Manitoba, and we've spoken to the families and the parents of victims at Vincent Massey. And those conversations, which I'm just incredibly grateful for, were eye-opening, and they were very disturbing as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What we've learned is that while the risks of sexual abuse and abuse in sports remain very low, there are a number of important things this government can do to keep our young athletes as safe as possible. But before discussing responses to those gaps, it's important to ask how widespread this issue is. And I'd like to mention here a study that I reviewed in preparing for this debate that found that somewhere between 2 to 8% of minor age athletes, 2 to 8%, are victims of abuse or sexual abuse within the context of playing sports. I think that number is a lot higher than maybe many of us would expect it to be. And in 98% of these cases, the perpetrators were either coaches, teachers, or instructors, people in positions of authority for those young athletes. And that same study showed that the more elite the level of play, the greater the risk to athletes. It also noted that the majority of abuse takes place where sports activities take place or in the home of the abuser, which this bill, I think, speaks to, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So as we can see, the issue is not as isolated as some might think. And in recent years, thanks to the bravery of victims who've come forward and the work of many advocates, we've seen more and more being done to protect athletes in other jurisdictions. We've seen legislation brought forward at a federal level in the US with their Protecting Young Athletes from Sexual Abuse and Safe Sports Act that was passed a few years ago. And our own federal government here in Canada recently committed to funding a third-party reporting mechanism that would allow individuals playing national level sports to report incidences of abuse and sexual abuse. And so the question for us here as legislators in Manitoba is, what is our role in helping to make sports safer for our kids? What do we need to do? And I'm happy to share that in researching the issue, having spoken with Sports Manitoba, doing the work, of course, with my colleague for St. Vital and others, we've learned that we do have some of the right building blocks here in place in Manitoba. Those building blocks include a tip line, which we don't think is widely known enough, or that we haven't done enough to market or to make young athletes aware of that or families aware of that tip line, but it is there. And there are some mechanisms in place to trigger third-party investigations. Again, not enough awareness is in place about that, the ability to access that support, but it is there. And I was also happy to see that after we brought forward our PMR, our opposition caucus brought forward a PMR in the House last spring, and after victims' families showed up here at the Legislature, that the government did take some steps in the right direction, but there are still gaps. There are still some gaps, and this bill seeks to fill those gaps. And it's my hope that today, this government will join us in working to fill those gaps. Firstly, we need to ensure that all coaches in Manitoba, whether it's in community or school-based sports, receive mandatory training that will help them to prevent sexual abuse. The requirement for this training should be enshrined in legislation. Many instances of sexual abuse of athletes have also been found to occur in the homes of coaches, and for this reason, we should also be legislating a requirement that requires, in those instances where coaches want to have an athlete in their home, that they obtain the permission from the parent or, in the case of school sports, of the principal. Building on that need for education, we also need to ensure that young athletes are offered training to understand what grooming looks like and what constitutes inappropriate behavior from a coach. And I know we touched on this a bit, my colleague from St. Vital touched on this a little bit, but in speaking with some of the parents of victims at Vincent Massey, one of the things we learned, or that was clear, was that young athletes in some cases weren't really even able to recognize that the behaviors that their coaches were putting forward were inappropriate. They didn't see, they didn't have the ability to identify that it was grooming behavior. They couldn't see necessarily with clarity that their behavior was inappropriate. So we need to make sure that young athletes have that opportunity to learn about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, from what they can expect from a coach, and that they're able to identify those behaviors. We should also be offering education to parents. This bill, again, would ensure that they know what to look for and they know how to identify grooming behaviors from the coaches in their kids' sports teams. There are unfortunately some things we do not have in place which could not be included in the scope of this bill, such as the need to ensure that youth who've been sexually abused in sport, as well as their family members, can access appropriate counseling. That's something that's incredibly important that I think we need to ensure is put in place in this province, that I know as of yet we haven't seen investments in that. That's incredibly important, and we know from speaking with families that that's something that's missing and that they would really like to see from this province, that is on offer. Unfortunately, again, that cannot be included within the scope of this bill, but that is something that we do need to see and that we strongly encourage this government to consider investing in. This private member's bill, introduced by the member for St. Vital, offers this government an opportunity. It offers them an opportunity to work together with us to better protect young athletes in Manitoba. No child should feel powerless against harassment and abuse from their coaches, and we are bringing forward a well thought out plan here in the form of a bill that can help to put a stop to a lot of sexual abuse towards our young athletes. These are solutions that have come forward from many conversations with people in community. They've come from the community, and we're asking for this government to support this bill today. In closing, I'd like to again thank my colleague from St. Vital for the opportunity to work together with him, alongside him in developing this bill. And I'd of course like to thank Jordy Wilson for his work in pushing this issue forward, as well as all the community advocates who've done so much work in fighting for changes to better protect our youth in sport. And I'd also like to acknowledge all those who've come forward with their own stories of abuse in sport here in Manitoba for their bravery. Their bravery has generated a huge amount of new momentum for change in this province, and I'm hopeful that we'll see all members of this House support this bill and that this provincial government will commit to the requests being made by community. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning.
Good morning, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thank you. This gives me great pleasure to be able to stand up and put a few words on the record in regards to Bill 244, brought forward by the member for St. Vital, the Protecting Youth in Sports Act. We've heard a couple speakers from the opposition side talk about working together and collaboratively and that, but unfortunately, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're not really seeing the actions or the words that they are saying. But on our side of the House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have been working with many Manitobans, and not only Manitobans but Canadians, on this issue. We know that this is something that has been going on for quite some time, and it's taken our government to move many initiatives forward in order to try to protect our youth and to bring and to shine a light on various different topics around abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, throughout not only sport, but also the education system, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Bill 244, and I appreciate the fact that both the member for St. Vital and the member for St. James both basically said how this bill has room for improvements and has gaps, because it does. We have been working quite closely with a lot of our education partners and stakeholders all across this great province of ours, as I've said already. Matter of fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have actually sent out a letter, some direction from the Education Department 2-hour school boards, superintendents, secretariat, treasurers, school division principals, and funded independent schools on some directives. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm going to table that letter for today because it seems that, once again, the NDP, instead of wanting to actually work together, they want to go on this partisan bent. That's okay. That's what they want to do. We are not going to do that. We are going to be working together as we move forward to try to protect our youth, not only in sport, but within education. It doesn't take me long to get to this bill, which is fairly thin. But that being said, that's just, as the member said himself, there are some gaps and there's definitely can be improvements to this bill. So under the explanatory note, it says teachers are exempt from these requirements when teaching the curriculum. I don't even understand what he means by that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We have safety in regards to students embedded in the curriculum in the K-12 system. Plus, as the letter that I've tabled absolutely is requiring all school staff, not only coaches, but all school staff, bus drivers, to take the Respect in Schools program by February of 2023. Another point that both members fail to bring up. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's a lot of great initiatives that have happened since we formed government in regards to this avenue in protecting youth, not only in sports, but in education. It's unfortunate that a lot of these things had happened under the previous government's reign and will continue to happen under different political stripes, reigns in far as governments. But what we're trying to do is empower the bystanders. We're trying to educate the youth. We're trying to educate coaches. Respect in sport is mandatory through Sport Manitoba. And in schools, we have Respect in Schools is mandated. And also Respect in Sport is mandated for school coaches as well. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm not sure if the member for Union Station is going to get up and share a few words that they would like to put on the record, but I'm sure they will have that opportunity in the future. Again, we're partnering, working together with our education stakeholders. I know that since the directive that the department sent out on May 11th, which I tabled the letter, the Manitoba School Boards Association has also strengthened that directive, and that comes with really good partnering and working together with people with some common goals. And I know that the members opposite, deep down, I know that kids' safety is at the basis of all this. I do know that. But the fact that they stand in their place today and talk about partnership and working together and all these type of great things, words, their actions don't show it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm going to prove that once again. So they forwarded a letter in regards to requesting a meeting, and this was after the resolution. This was after the letter had gone out to school divisions. I actually think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this piece of legislation was written around the same time that resolution was, because they failed to mention all the good things that are happening within our school system and within our province. Just recently, we continued making investments in the education world. We provided $150,000 for the Kids Help phone line and a 24/7 mental health professional e-counseling and crisis support program for youth, accessible by phone, chat, and texting from any part of the province, with services in English, French, Ukrainian, Russian, Pashto, Dari, Mandarin, and Arabic. Did any one of those two members ever say that? No, because they did not necessarily consult with either myself or the Minister for Sport, Culture, and Heritage, which have been great partners working forward. Matter of fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in regards to the meeting that we had with the opposition on August 30th, the initial letters, and they know that where I'm going with this, The initial letters that they had provided to the Education Department and Sport, Culture and Heritage did not even include, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the critic, the MLA for Transcona, who, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is an educator like myself, and an added bonus, he was an administrator in the school system. I don't see any conversation within their so-called team on the opposition side. I don't see the collaboration happening, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But you know what? Myself as an educator, knowing that I need to work together nonpartisan on this topic, I myself and the Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage took it upon ourselves to actually invite the education critic, the MLA for Transcona, to our meeting on August 30th. Plus the response that we had. I know that the member for St. John's is having difficulty this morning, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And you know what? She will have an opportunity to get up and put a few words on the record as far as their inaction and their lack of non-collaboration over on the NDP side, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Order. I'm more than willing to accommodate the occasional heckle, the occasional comment, but to sit in one's seat and speak your own speech while someone else has the floor takes it too far. The Minister of Education has the floor. I recognize the Minister, and you have 1 minute and 20 left.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for your interaction with the members here. And it's unfortunate that the member for St. John's actually wasted 25, 30 seconds of my time. She will have the opportunity to stand up and put a few words on record if she'd like. But I'd like to just repeat that the Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage and our colleagues on our side of the House, including the member for Fort White, has been instrumental in moving various different things forward in regards to sport and protecting our youth in Manitoba, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I know again that the member for St. John's just can't help herself.
I'm drawing attention to the opposition benches. I'm asking if those voices on the opposition side could show some respect, please. And if the clerks could add 15 seconds, I'd be grateful for that. 1-5, thank you. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now I truly feel that we are talking about sport because you've now added additional time to my clock, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is not a comical issue, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is so important, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We value the fact that victims and survivors have come forward and shared their stories, because that's how we get to improve things here in the government and make laws and protections for our youth, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We've done a lot so far since we've taken government. There's more work to do, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I look forward to carrying this
Member's
bill
time has
forward.
expired. The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm happy to rise this morning and speak to Bill 244, Protecting Youth in Sports Act, and I will keep my remarks very short, as I would like to see this bill go to the committee stage so we have the opportunity to hear from presenters and what they have to say about the legislation. Just a few thoughts. I do believe that as legislators, we have a responsibility and a role to play in protecting youth from vulnerable situations, and I believe that this legislation can play a positive role towards that. I commend the member for St. Vital for bringing forward this legislation, and I would encourage him to think about even combining it with the resolution that he brought forward in the spring, or consider amendments towards the bill. Regardless, I think the bill should move forward in itself, though, Mr. Deputy Speaker. couple thoughts that come to mind are the topic of boundaries. It's been said this morning, but there should be clear and defined boundaries between coaches and between students, as there should be between teachers and students. Anyone who is in a higher position than someone or who is in a training position than someone, there should be boundaries, clear boundaries. There should be training to go along with these boundaries. And I know we have training through Respect in Sport, and I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about what they have in place. I know recently Sport Manitoba and their sport framework talks about including a support line for youth at risk of abuse, harassment, bullying, and hazing. I think that we need to make sure that this information is widespread, people are aware of it, know how to access it. My colleagues have spoken about the rule of two, and again, there's always room for improvement, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I know I've also, at every opportunity I get, I try to bring up the idea of regulating therapy here in the province of Manitoba. I think that this could be a great resource, whether it be for students or players, for coaches, for teachers, anyone who may need those extra resources, Mr. Deputy Speaker. All in all, I think that this is a positive step. It works towards protecting all parties involved, again, whether that's coaches, teachers, school divisions, and students and players, of course, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and happy to see it go to committee and hear from the public on it. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? The House is ready for the question. The question before the House is second reading of Bill 244, the Protecting Youth in Sports Act. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed. Agreed and so ordered. I declare the motion carried. The Honourable Member for Concordia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you canvass the House to see if there's will to call it 11 o'clock?
Is it the will of the House to call it 11 o'clock? Agreed. Agreed. The time. That means that this morning then we will recess at 11:58. We will call it 12 o'clock at 11:58. So a couple of minutes early. The time then being 11, we will move along to private members' resolutions, and the resolution before the House is Resolution 22, condemning the provincial government for failing to make life more affordable for Manitobans. The Honourable Member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Therefore, I move, seconded by the member from the Point Douglas, that therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba condemn the provincial government for making life more expensive for the average Manitobans.
Thank you. It has been moved by the Honourable Member for the Maples, seconded by the Honourable Member for Point Douglas, that therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba condemn the provincial government for making life more expensive for the average Manitoban. The motion is in order. The Honourable Member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. When Manitobans elect someone to represent them in this House, they have expectations that MLA in this House will be working for every Manitoban. Unfortunately, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Stephenson government is working for only select few % of the people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, during the summer break, I had a chance to meet people in my constituency, the Maples, and the community events throughout Manitoba. They have lots of concerns. I do like to highlight a few of them, which I will start with the healthcare. Mr. Deputy Speaker, people are waiting much longer in ERs to see doctors because of this PC government's cuts. Healthcare workers are being mandated with overtime. Mr. Deputy Speaker, recently while door knocking, I had a chance to meet few of the retired nurses. They're willing to work in the healthcare again. The question is, will they be mandated to work 16, 18, 20 hours? They are willing to put probably 8 hours, 6 hours of their time. Because of the mandated, they don't want to work. People are waiting far too longer to get necessary surgeries. I recently met on Novell Street one of my constituents who was waiting for 2 years to get the surgeries. Well, his surgery was last month, and then but put it off again because there was no nurses. Sort of nurses. Matter of fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, province-wide healthcare is sort of 2,400 nurses. PC government is spending millions of dollars on for-profit private agency nurses instead of investing in making public healthcare a stronger and better place for nurses to work. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in Maples, they closed Seven Oaks ER. In Concordia, they closed Concordia ER. They fired nurses. They let those nurses to go into the private agencies. Why would anybody will come into a public system when you are mandating someone to work 18 hours if they are young people? They will not gonna work. Mr. Deputy Speaker, people are waiting for months for a healthcare card. This is another issue that I have seen when I go door knocking, people are talking about. People are waiting for the birth certificate for months, marriage certificate, death certificate, because of this species cuts to the civil servant. Another issue is affordability. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Manitoba NDP offered the Stephenson government to work in bipartisan manner to address the issue of rising grocery costs. But the Premier said, he said no. She doesn't want to work with the oppositions. Actually, even in my caucus, I said, even places like India, when there is an emergency or when there's something serious comes up, there's a meetings between the government and the oppositions. How come it's not happening here? During the COVID-19, nothing was shared with the oppositions. Mr. Deputy Speaker, transportation cost is up 15.9% in Manitoba compared to 10.3% nationally from last year. Price of gas is up 28.8% in Manitoba. This is not considering the recent 20 cents increase that has went into it. Price of groceries is up 10.8%. It's hard for people on minimum basis making life need. Mr. Deputy Speaker, residential renters tax credit reduced from $700 to $525 by this PC government. On the other hand, you can say this is another $175 a tax on those seniors. PC government has hiked Manitoba hydro rate every year since they took office. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do like to highlight what percentage they hike every year. In 2016, they increased by 3.3%. In 2017, they increased by 3.36%. So this has gone on every single year since 2016 up to 20.88%. Mr. Deputy Speaker, recently we have seen that they have put in a new affordability package. But the problem is there's so many people are missing in that affordability package. Students, they are missing in there. Single families, there's nothing for them either. Mr. Deputy Speaker, like even people coming in from out of, like in province to Brandon University or into Winnipeg, those students are renting places. They lost on that tax credit. That's $175. On the other hand, this is pretty much $175 tax on those students. Recently, I also have received few emails that Manitoba Provincial Nominee Program applications are not being processed on time. There are between 6 months to a year to process the applications. Those are in province, in country applications. These are not even out of the country applications. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are the second lowest minimum wages in the country. That is only $13.50 per hour. In recent committee meetings, we asked our critic from finance asked if that will be going up. The finance minister's response was, this is only for 2 times only. After that, they will revert back to the previous programs. So living wage right now in Manitoba, in the city of Winnipeg, is around $18.34 an hour. So next year it's gonna be $15, so they will not, people don't have to rely on food, they can't even afford the food on this with this price. They don't have to live in poverty when they are working full-time with minimum wages. The living wage is $18.34 at this moment. I know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm just running out of time. I hope even the members from the other side, they can see it. They are hearing it from every single day. I'm receiving the email. I'm sure they are probably receiving the same emails too. Hopefully, they are also going out into the community and listening to their constituent, what they want. What they want right now is the government that will work for everyday Manitobans. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
A question period of up to 10 minutes will be held, and questions may be addressed in the following sequence. The first question may be asked by a member from another party. Any subsequent questions must follow a rotation between parties. Each independent member may ask one question, and no question or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The floor is open for questions. The honorable member for Midland.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the NDP bringing forward this resolution this morning, if the NDP is concerned about cost of living, perhaps a member could explain why the former NDP raised the provincial sales tax from 7 to 8%, which affects low-income workers, low-income Manitobans the hardest.
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What we are talking about, the resolution
Order.
today is how
I encourage.
the provincial government.
Order, please. I just want to encourage members not to heckle their own members. The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What I want to talk about today is how during these tough times, whenever Manitobans elect us to send us to this house, 57 members to this house, we should be working for every single one of them. Right now, the affordability is in crisis, so we have to work for all Manitobans.
The
And
member's
PC
time has
government-
expired. The honourable member for Point Douglas.
Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Maples for bringing this forward and for listening to Manitobans, listening to those people who are emailing him, because I'm also getting the same emails. I'm also getting people visiting my office that are struggling every day to make ends meet, that have become homeless because they can't make ends meet. They can't pay their rent. They've been evicted. They can't keep their lights on, and winter's coming. We know that people are going to be in the bus shelters again, and does this government have a plan for that? I don't think so. But I'd like to ask the member, why is it important to prevent Manitoba Hydro from being privatized?
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank you for that excellent question. Manitoba Hydro needs to remain publicly owned by Manitobans. This will ensure the hydro rates will stay low for consumers compared to the other provinces. Low hydro rate for households means more affordability bills for families. Low hydro rates for business means competitive advantage for businesses to locate into Manitoba and stay in Manitoba. Public ownership means profit for Manitoba go to Manitobans.
The honourable member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I do want to just note that with a few changes, all of these could have been written by the PC when they were in opposition, describing what the NDP did when they were in government. But I have to ask, if we're talking about affordability, why is there no mention whatsoever of people on EIA? There are over 70,000 people in this province who are living in dire poverty, who have barely seen an increase in EIA since 1986. Why, if the NDP is concerned about affordability, is there no mention whatsoever of the 70,000 people who've been living in poverty with barely a raise in over 30 years?
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As probably a member from St. Boniface knows, in my remarks, I said when we send to this house, we should be working for every Manitobans. This include people on EIA. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Honourable member for Radisson.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member opposite knows that I respect him as a legislator and I want him to be able to use his voice in this chamber. By now I suspect I respect him maybe more than some of his colleagues seem to. Perhaps he should consider coming on over. But I'm glad he's been allowed to present this resolution today in the chamber. But I am saddened to see a resolution that is completely incongruent with reality and has zero credibility. The reality is that thanks to our government, Manitobans pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars less in taxes each year. So my question for the member is, who in the NDP caucus would think so little of him to have him bring a resolution this detached from reality forward?
Great question.
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Order.
Question. Well, the only thing is,
Order.
what we are seeing from this provincial government so far.
I repeat my earlier admonition that members should not heckle while their own members are talking. The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I was saying, we are talking about the provincial government that is not helping anyone at this moment. They are only working people, landlords that not located even in Manitoba. Polo Park is not owned by Manitobans. There's other places such as MTS, those are big.
The member's time has expired. The honourable member for Point Douglas.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker, and I just want to say on this side of the House, we want to feed children in schools. We want to ensure that kids are getting the proper supports, educational supports in school, and we want to ensure that people are housed in this province and that they're getting proper mental health and addiction support, unlike members opposite.
That's right, that's right.
So I'd like to ask the member, the NDP has called for a living wage for Manitobans because no one who works full-time should live in poverty, but that's what's happening right now under this PC government, under the Pallister-Stephenson government. Why is it so important to have a living wage here in Manitoba?
Great question. Great question.
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Another excellent question by member from Point Douglas. The NDP believe that anyone who works full-time should be able to afford to pay for a place to live and put food on the table and have money for transportation and necessity of life for themselves and their families. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member for Midland.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So if the NDP is concerned about the cost of living, why then did they oppose and vote against raising the basic personal exemption, which helps especially low-income Manitobans?
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I said, I think in my remarks, NDP was willing to work with the PC government to set up a committee for bipartisan to resolve the issues or even to see how we can help. Other provinces has helped while lowering the gas taxes. We were willing to help, but the PC wasn't on the table. They didn't want to get help from the opposition. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member for Point Douglas.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker. This government has a track record of freezing wages for workers. They've been taken to court over freezing wages for government. They don't think it's that they deserve to have these wages, especially our frontline working nurses who have been working night and day to ensure that Manitobans are getting the health care they need. So I'll ask the member, why is it important that this government not stand in the way of bargaining and making sure that workers get the proper wages that they need and bargaining in good faith?
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Workers deserve fair wages. Workers have the right by law to bargain flexibly. Manitobans feel that the PC government doesn't care about them, doesn't care about their health care, doesn't care about the roads, doesn't care about the kids, about our schools. Manitobans feels we are our own. In fact, Premier said that during the Omicron wave of pandemic, Manitobans have to learn to take care of themselves. So Premier wasn't there for us then, she was not there for us today. Thank you.
The honourable member for Radisson.
You know, I'll remind the member that that it's our government that took 35,000 children out of poverty, not theirs. It's our government. It's our government that's sending checks to families that are making sure that families with children have the money that they need at this time while they're facing rising prices. Once again, I guess my question for the member is, you know, how does he think the Manitoba public will believe him when an NDP government raised taxes in every single budget 17 years in a row? Wow. But today they have a government that's lowered taxes every single budget we've ever delivered.
The honourable member for the Maples.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm just trying to take those, look at the notes here that I have written, and I'm sure since they took office in 2016, they have raised Manitoba hydro rate every single year. That's 20.88% every single year. Every single year. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The time for questions is over. The floor is open for debate. The Honourable Minister for Seniors and Long-Term Care.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am looking very forward to the discussion today in the House based on this resolution. I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this gives the opposition an opportunity to finally bring forward their solutions and their plans. So we're very much, we're very much looking for the speakers, for the opposition, not to just get up there and fearmonger and do what they traditionally do, but to actually come up and tell this House what their solutions are, what their plans are. So you know what? I certainly appreciate that enthusiasm coming from the other side, and we can look forward to hearing some really constructive solutions from the other side. Obviously, if history holds, we won't hear anything but fear-mongering. We won't hear anything but other criticism. No solutions, no plan. But they'll have the opportunity to actually put something forward that can actually be scrutinized. So, look forward to that. So, Madam Speaker, I am pleased to rise in the House today to speak to this resolution. Affordability has been top of the mind of our government and always will be. And as we know that as a government, we need to find solutions to support the people of Manitoba, which our government continues to do. We need to make the decisions necessary to ensure the protection and sustainability, quality service of all Manitobans, which we are doing and have done. Our government has begun the hard work required to repair the damage that the NDP has created over their terms of government. Bankruptcy, the golden goose of Manitoba, Manitoba Hydro. Unbelievable that they talk about affordability, and yet, in their government, what did they do? They raised the PST. Our government, fortunately, had the wisdom to drop the PST.
Order.
Sure. Our government, Mr. Speaker, our government is focused on fixing the finances, repairing the services, and rebuilding the economy as we've tried to do time and time again. COVID-19 pandemic created more financial burdens with rising inflation, interest rate hikes, and other financial challenges Manitobans are feeling due to the stress of the rising cost of living. During COVID-19, pandemic of the province extended to $45 million in direct financial support to Manitoba seniors. Through the Seniors Economic Recovery Tax Credit, we delivered a $200 check to each recipient, and that was appreciated by the seniors of Manitoba. Our government made it a priority to make life more affordable for Manitobans. That is why our Premier, as well as my colleagues, continue to advocate for federal action to ease financial burdens. This resolution is a great opportunity to remind the House and members opposite that their party voted against affordability a short time ago. Madam Speaker, my department coming forward with over $50 million to support seniors, $32 million for the implementation of the Stevenson Review, creating services for seniors, $20 million to support the senior strategy to ensure seniors' needs are fulfilled. And what did the opposition do? They voted against it. They voted against it. Over $50 million towards seniors, the opposition voted against it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And they claim that they want to support seniors and they want to support services for seniors. $50 million and they voted against it.
Order.
Unbelievable. I am pleased to put some words on the records to our government's past and present initiatives to make life more affordable for Manitobans. An example of this is when our Premier joined Premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan to call on the federal government to suspend the carbon tax temporarily. As well, our government introduced Bill 36 so that Manitobans can have a stable and affordable hydro rate. I find it quite ironic that the members opposite mentioned seniors in this resolution. As I indicated, they voted against the services that we're trying to provide for seniors. I would like to remind the government, that seniors have a situation where medication is a priority of this government to ensure that our seniors are always taken care of and serviced. I would like to remind the House of the numerous tax hikes that the members opposite initiated when they're in power, and yet they continue to say they're worried about affordability for Manitobans. Madam Speaker, or Mr. Speaker, we have removed retail sales tax on home insurance, personal services, preparing wills, and preparing personal income tax returns. And in 2017, Manitoba introduced indexation of personal income taxes, and those savings are worth $162 million. I am pleased that our government took swift action this summer to find ways to ease the financial burden of Manitobans who are facing high interest rates. Our government introduced $86 million family affordability package, and we will continue to introduce different services to help the people of Manitoba afford in today's difficult climate. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kiiwetinoong.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It gives me great, I want to say great pleasure to speak to the resolution as brought forward today, but unfortunately the content of the resolution and the reason for it is somewhat disturbing. It's interesting that the minister responsible for seniors was the first one to kind of speak to the resolution when his government has made life less affordable and more expensive on seniors here in the province of Manitoba. Including in his words in his preamble to be able to say and reference the $200 check that I think for the most part was just missing the Love Brian Pallister at the bottom of it. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there was a number of seniors that took that check and that payment, which was buying them off with their own money, by the way, took that money and just had to endorse them back and sign it over because their hydro bill was increased. So it really did not have a net effect in a positive way on their cost of living and the affordability issues that they have. And the other word, and the member opposite had also referred to the fact that, you know, this is affordability is an issue in their caucus. But it's just not an important issue in their caucus. It may be on the wall, it may be a dry erase marker that maybe they erase once in a while, and it's a buzzword they want to throw out once in a while. But the other word that they need to put in there is crisis, because there is an affordability crisis here in Manitoba due to the impacts of this government, decisions they're making, decisions they're not making, and supports they're not providing. And that's clearly an out-of-touch way of dealing with the crisis. And it is clearly a crisis. We have a crisis in healthcare, which they would not recognize. We have a crisis with the cost of living that they will not recognize. And they will not even use that word. But it is simply there. And that's the reality for Manitobans. That's not the reality for the top percentage that this government is representing when it comes time to their decisions and their so-called incentives and affordability issues and policies that they're bringing forward. It's not reaching everyday Manitobans. And they're just simply not listening to that. When you see those, and they keep calling them the affordability payments, affordability checks, that's a Band-Aid solution, a one-time, one day out of the entire year solution. Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, in my constituency, affordability has been a crisis for years and years and decades. And this government is doing nothing to help with that. So these $200 payments that they gave to the seniors, these $200 affordability or $300, whatever that's going to be, depending on your family, these affordability payments that they're setting out as a one-time Band-Aid solution are not going to help. It's not going to help in the big picture. Because there's simply, most people are just going to have to sign that check over to pay for their increased hydro rates due to this government. The increased cost of food due to decisions and non-supports from this government. In one of my northern communities, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, I've sat with families and they talked about going to the grocery store with one bag, just a simple white t-shirt bag, and coming home with that one bag, not even full, maybe 3/4 full of groceries, $250. That's how much that cost. One bag of one groceries to feed a family of maybe 4 or 5 or even bigger than that. So I ask you, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, how is that helping? How is that $200 payment here going to help? How is that going to help that family pass that 1 hour or even that one meal? It's just simply not. So this government needs to have a strategy brought forward that helps alleviate that crisis, alleviate that affordability crisis and that struggle that people are going through every day. But instead, the policies and the issues brought forward by this government are just reflective of helping the few, helping the rich few that in some cases, in most cases for that matter, don't even have ties to Manitoba. But will take that money out of Manitoba at the expense and on the backs of Manitobans and at the sacrifice of Manitobans. Manitobans have been asked for a long time now, especially over the course of the pandemic, to make sacrifices. And they have. Manitobans have stepped up and made sacrifices. But now it's time for this government to step up and help Manitobans. And they're just simply not doing that. And that's just simply out of touch with the realities of what Manitobans are going through. When you talk about affordability, it's not simply a matter of even just your paycheck. The living wage that has been called for a long time that this government just seems to ignore. It's about being able to now have that affordability across all aspects of your life and all aspects of your family. Going to the grocery store, also going and cashing your paycheck, but also being able to pay your bills and to be able to afford to pay your bills. Manitobans simply just can't do that under the non-supports and the non-commitments from this government. It's very difficult to do. And I realize members opposite are so out of touch with that because they just cater to the privileged, cater to the few that have the means and have the wherewithal to be able to afford things in their life. But the simple matter, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, is most Manitobans are not that percentage. Most Manitobans cannot afford to simply just pick up and go to the grocery store because they feel like getting something because, you know what, I'm out of whatever it may be in your cupboard, food-wise. Most Manitobans can open their cupboard and maybe a lot of those cupboards are bare because they simply can't afford food. They simply can't afford clothing. because this government has made life more expensive. More expensive across a whole gamut: healthcare, education, hydro, MPI, everything. So when this government sits there and touts the announcements and the payoffs that are given out, Manitobans can see through that. Manitobans are very smart, very intelligent, and they see what that is. They see attempts by this government to pay them off with their own money. And they see through that. And you'll clearly see that when Manitobans come forth, they speak their minds, they bring their concerns. And members on this side, in our caucus, in our reality that we have over here, not the fantasy world that the PCs live in, where they think everything is great because their groups or their consultants tell them that it's so. The fact of the matter, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, is the reality for Manitobans, and I've used this term often, everyday Manitobans, is it's a struggle and it's a crisis. And it's a crisis every day. And there is little to no help. There's Band-Aid solutions from this government that are not addressing the root causes of why affordability crisis exists today. And that's what it is. I know this government hates to use that word crisis, but that's exactly what we're in. Affordability crisis, health crisis. They'll conveniently blame the pandemic when it comes time to having to address and answer these issues with phrases like, did you not know we were in a worldwide pandemic? Well, did you not know? Would be my question to that. You can't conveniently use that excuse to not support Manitobans. But at the same time, flip that around and then shame Manitobans for asking those questions. Shame Manitobans for bringing forth their concerns. Shame Manitobans for not taking care of their families. Because they simply can't afford to. And they can't afford to because of the affordability crisis that this government is forcing upon all of us. There's no assistance. There's no programs out there. They're hoping that, we're just going to ride this out. It's going to go away. The price of gas will drop. The price of groceries will drop. The price of hydro will drop. They're not dropping anything. They're not helping with anything. So under the dark days of Brian Pallister, you've seen, oh, here's a check. I'm going to write off in the sunset. I'm going to write a check for $200 to all our seniors and say, there you go. Love, Brian. Postmark Costa Rica. And the fact of the matter is that did not really do anything for Manitobans. Manitobans looked at that and they said, what is this? What is this going to do? I'm just going to sign this over and mail it back to Manitoba Hydro because my rates have gone up too because of this government. So this, I can't even take this to the bank. It's not even worth taking that step to deposit at the bank because I can't go buy groceries with this. I can't go buy clothes with this. I just have to go back and pay higher bills that are put forth by this government. So we have to go there and say this affordability crisis is a reality for all Manitobans, and this
Members' time has expired. The honourable member for Radisson.
Put some logic on the record, some truth.
I thank my colleagues here for their
Order.
support. I think they're expecting some kind of a show, but the reality is that my comments directed to the member were sincere. I really do think that he has a lot to offer this chamber, more than he's been allowed to offer under his current leadership. And so I want to make sure.
Stop bullying him.
I want to make sure
Order.
that his front bench knows that, and that they actually show him the respect that he deserves as an MLA in this House, because I do believe that he has respect, and I think that he should be respected. And I also believe that during our questions and answers, he answered well, and I want to compliment him. He had some good responses and showed some real strength. Now. I also want to be fair to the members opposite.
Order.
The opposition benches they do sometimes come up with good ideas. They do.
Not often.
And it does happen. I would say that it happens more with the 3 independent members, in my experience, than it does with the 19 or thereabouts,
that's true.
of members of the NDP. But
I agree.
what happens? What happens when a good idea and genuine concern
Order.
is brought forward to this House? I can tell you, because we're a government that listens. We're a government that listens, and when we hear a good idea, we know it. And guess what we do with it? We say, you know what? That's a good idea. I think we're going to do that. Let's do it. So that's why, for example, we're moving on our way to a $15 minimum wage. Members opposite asked for it. Now we're having it. You know, the member for Elmwood is a long advocate for, moving on catalytic converter theft. I thank him for his advocacy. That's why we brought forward legislation. I credit him for that. I've credited him publicly in a newspaper for that. And guess what? Now we have a 90% reduction in catalytic converter theft. That was a good idea. We heard it, we put it in place, and now we have the benefits. So I really am grateful for the good ideas that occasionally come from the members opposite. They are, a group that we can listen to in addition to all the Manitobans that we do hear from. And I respect the member opposite. When he's listening to Manitobans, he's hearing a lot of the same messages that I'm hearing. There's no surprise there, right? We speak to a broad swath of people in our community. It's no surprise that we're going to hear similar concerns. But the question is, what's the solution to those concerns? And I can tell you that the solution to those concerns is not NDP policy. No, it is not. And so I just want to say that when you look at those members opposite and you see that whatever good ideas that they've had, our government's acted on or is in the current works of acting on, what does that leave them with? What does that leave them with? Bad ideas. That's all they have left. Now, the first member, the member for the honorable minister for seniors and long-term care, he was asking about the plan of the NDP, and sometimes I want to encourage my own colleagues here to say, we don't have to have it drawn out in every single letter. I know that the NDP likely won't spell it out letter by letter as to what their plan is, but you can hear it in the questions they ask. Yesterday, for example, very direct question asked by the leader of the NDP. And what did that question clearly say to all Manitobans? If you would elect an NDP government, you can kiss your education property tax rebates goodbye.
Wow. Shame.
There you go, $500 off the table of Manitobans into the pockets.
Order.
That's their plan. That's their plan. Actually, I think I wrote in my notes here, they have a 3-part plan, and we can see what this 3-part plan is.
Let's hear it.
It's raising taxes.
Order.
Raising taxes. And raising tax.
Order, please. Okay, order, please. The level of boisterousness is getting out of hand. The member for Radisson has the floor.
I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for attempting to maintain some level of decorum in this plan, or sorry, in this chamber. Now, property tax rebates, I think we all understand the NDP plan is to take those away, to raise your taxes.
Raise taxes.
The PST, well, we'll see if they actually are honest about what their plans are. I know that in the past, when I've kind of costed out some of the suggestions that they've made, some of them quite ludicrous, I think the NDP might stand for nearly doubling the PST, because that's probably what it would cost to afford all these kinds of things. Now, the members opposite talked about hydro, and I do want to take a moment. I want to take a moment to talk about hydro, because he's right that hydro rates slowly increase with inflation, and we want to make sure that hydro stays as much of a crown jewel as it possibly can. But I tell you, the NDP government did more to desecrate that jewel than any government in the history of Manitoba.
Shame.
They did that
Shame.
by wasting billions of dollars. Now, I'm a businessman, many of you know this. I understand the difference between investment and waste. So I will credit the NDP, for example, they built Kiosk, and Kiosk can generate revenue. That's all true. And so the question is, did you build Kiosk for the price that it should have been built for, or did you waste money And the answer is you wasted money. Over $2 billion of waste was identified. I can hardly think about how much actual waste occurred. And guess who has to pay for the $2 billion in waste? Manitoba ratepayers have to pay. So it's understandable. And I think Manitobans understand that when you have such a significant waste of money, any other business, a privately held business, would be struggling to survive. They would have to raise prices. Why is it a surprise that Hydro asks to raise rates? They have to, because they have a massive amount of debt. And now we're in an environment where interest rates are rising, and we have members opposite who indignantly ask us what's going on when they are the ones who saddled Manitoba Hydro with billions of dollars of unnecessary debt, not to mention billions of dollars of perhaps, investment. Those billions of dollars of investment never received the scrutiny required by the PUP. We got a bill before the House.
Order. Enthusiasm is good, craziness is not so good. The member for Radisson has the floor.
We have a bill before this legislature right now that would require projects like the NDP went forward with to receive PUB scrutiny. My question for the members would do they support that measure? Do they at least support that measure that they couldn't execute on another wasteful project?
Order.
I pulled down the wrong side of the lake. That's right. Wasted money building kiosks, poor management. This is the legacy of the NDP, and Manitobans remember it. They know it. They know that they cannot put their hope and faith and trust in the members opposite. It will cost them. It will cost them dearly on every single kitchen table in this province. Money that is currently in the pockets of Manitobans is going to come right back out and go right into the hands of these new Democratic members if they ever form government. And it's our duty on this side of the House to do whatever we can to prevent that from happening.
Shame, NDP.
Order.
Well, the members opposite, I wonder what their strategy is, because we have seen over and over again them attempt to mislead Manitobans. And they attempt frequently in this House to mislead this House, to mislead Manitobans. This is their modus operandi. And it surprises me. They had the whole summer to get ready. They had the whole summer to get ready, and even opinion polls would suggest that they should be, ready. And instead, they come into this House, and the words out of their mouth, how detached from the truth, I cannot imagine. The premises that they start their arguments with, completely devoid of logic and reason. I believe that Manitoba voters know better. I believe that Manitoba voters will see through the NDP, that Manitoba's voters will know who to vote for in the next election. I thank once again the Liberal members for their contributions. I thank them on my Facebook page. That's what good opposition looks like, and you on the other side of the House better remember that. Thank you.
Order. The honourable member for St. Vital. My mistake. I apologize to all members. The honourable member for St. Boniface. It's been a rowdy hour. The honourable member for St. Boniface, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I am saying something anyway. Okay, so now that is over, it is a pleasure to put some facts on the record. I do want to just, one of which is apparently the member for Radisson has bought into some propaganda from the opposition that the member for Elmwood was entirely responsible for for the scrap metal bill, when in fact I brought mine in 2020, fully 6 months before anyone else. So, but you know, no, we shouldn't. Look, I know this is difficult. I know this is difficult because this is not a place that usually lets facts get in the way of debate. But on a more serious, on a much more serious note. On a more serious note.
Order.
The other thing about it.
Order, please. I need to be able to hear the member. I can't hear the member. The honourable member for St. Boniface has the floor.
On a much more serious note, as I mentioned, we're talking about affordability. This makes no mention whatsoever of people who are on EIA. And I did a quick look. The fact is that with a couple of very small changes, there are all over 70,000 people living on EIA in Manitoba. That number has been going up since 2008. I talked to an advocate who said his first case was in 1999 because he was advocating for an individual who'd been told that they would have their rotten tooth pulled. That procedure would be paid for, but the anesthetic, the freezing, wouldn't be. And that, to me, sort of sums up the sadism of the EIA system in Manitoba. But for an individual with a disability, the provincial monthly amount is $1,068. For an individual general assistance recipients, the provincial funding is $771. And for non-disabled single parents, it is $1,363. And for the most part, this is not what happened. Is that in 1992, these were rolled back to 1986 levels where they were frozen, and they've stayed frozen mostly for 36 years. So this is why we have the depth of poverty we have in Manitoba. It's absolutely disgraceful that it's been allowed to carry on, because I know that there are MLA expenses which cover more in groceries per month than what a single person on EIA is eligible for their entire life, for their rent, their cell phone, and everything else. The other thing about it is that with a few small details, almost all of these were done by the NDP as well. That contrary to what the PCs have this great myth that the NDP actually were spending money, and part of the reason that they ran deficits was because they were cutting taxes for the highest income earners, just as this government has. When you cut it, which is exactly the same thing happened when they changed the basic personal exemption. They changed the basic personal exemption, and the biggest savings were at the top. The biggest savings in the checks when it comes to property taxes. There was an individual with a condo in Point Douglas who got $8, but somebody in Tuxedo is getting $8,000 or $6,000. It's fundamentally unjust. Honestly, this kind of the fiscal management run by this government is the sort of thing that nearly tanked the UK, because they said they were going to go forward with a massive tax cut, and the IMF nearly had to step in because it nearly destroyed their currency. This is the kind of fiscal responsibility we're seeing from this government. And it's shameful, and there's much, much more can be done, but there's no question that neither this government nor the ones preceding it have done anything for affordability, because people have been struggling for so long. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member for Midland.
You remembered you this time.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank you for trying to keep some semblance of order here this morning.
You're welcome.
It's been a little difficult, but you're doing a great job. And first of all, there's not a tax that the NDP doesn't like and won't impose. We've seen this from history. They increased the provincial sales tax from 7% to 8%. That came at a direct cost, especially on low-income Manitobans. They bring forward a resolution that talks about the cost of living, but yet they voted against every tax measure that we've given to help low-income Manitobans. They voted against the basic personal exemption, which helps low-income Manitobans the most. They're in lockstep with that costly coalition in Ottawa for a $300 per ton carbon tax. That will be...
Order.
The NDP is on record as supporting, the provincial NDP is on record as supporting a $300 carbon tax. That will directly affect food prices, the grocery price that you pay at the store, because that will have, it's just an impact on every facet of production of food. that comes through, and we cannot
What are you doing
afford
to
this.
help? Nothing. People are homeless in this province.
The member next to me, the member for Point Douglas, just confirmed that they will get rid of the education property tax rebate. That goes,
Just because you have the mic.
I'm sure that that will be part of their campaign slogan to
Bold-faced lies. That's not a good look.
taking money out of pockets of Manitobans. That's what the former NDP government did. They took money out of Manitoba's pockets to put in their own pockets, and this
That's what you do
NDP
with your
opposition is
consultants.
headed the same way. They have no compassion at all for the taxes that Manitobans pay.
You have no compassion for the homeless.
They like to talk about hydro. However, they forget to
20%
talk about the
increase.
$4 billion overrun
$5 billion
on
in
Bipole
Saskatchewan.
and Kiosk. With rising interest rates, that debt has to be paid. The NDP doesn't worry about debt, but Manitoba Hydro does have to deal with the debt that they've been given. And with rising interest rates, it is going to be even more difficult for them to repay that capital cost, those capital cost overruns that the NDP oversaw
$5 billion
because
deal
they
with
did not go to the
Saskatchewan.
Public Utilities
Revenue,
Board,
where
they
is
did
that?
not go to the Clean Environment Commission for Kiosk, for Bipole. They rammed it through and sent a hydro line around the province. If only the NDP would get outside the perimeter and see the stupidity of Bipole 3, the route of that, when they could have had a much more direct route and saving billions of dollars. I was in the House. I saw the Finance Minister, Roseanne Wojcik, stand and say, Bipole 3 will not cost Manitobans 1 penny. And if you don't believe me, go back and look in Hansard, because it's there. It's going to cost Manitobans a lot of billions and billions of dollars in order to pay for that line.
$5 billion deal
And
with
yet the
Saskatchewan.
NDP does not want to
Where's
own
that
up to
money?
that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's not a tax that the NDP doesn't like. They are going to raise taxes on Manitobans if they ever get the chance. It's the reason we coined them as the Spend-EP. And it holds true now. But they're not being honest with Manitobans, and they need to be honest with Manitobans.
Order, please. When this matter is again before the House, the honourable member for Midland will have 6 minutes remaining. The hour being 12 noon, this House is adjourned and recessed and stands recessed until 1:30 p.m. this afternoon.
Maybe you better take that.